Korea created not only China and Japan, but all of human history. Ni hao, fine shits, and welcome to Real Human History 101. I'm Professor Rofl, and today we'll be talking about the Hwan Empire, one of the premium major powers of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar, which lasted from 8,245 to 6,172 BCE between the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate and the Hwan Empire. Now, for those of you who are interested, you can click at the top right down here or in the description down below for a video on the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate and its rise in modern-day Finngolia, along with the sources for today's video, and of course in the footnotes down below, as you can see right here. Thank you to the patrons for funding the course and also for all the research material on this video. This video is sponsored by War Thunder. Alright, it's time to talk about Korean mythology and its history. So, first and foremost, what we have here, this beautiful phallic symbol here, is the peninsula of Korea. Now, something to keep in mind about is that Korea, being a unified state, did exist for a good chunk of its history, but in the initial stages, Korea was divided between multitudes of different states. And we know this from various different Korean sources. We have the state of Silla, for example. We have the state of Baekje, for example. And then we have the state of Gojoseon. These states were the main players of what we know as the Three Kingdoms period for Korea. Now, the earliest Korean state that we know of is something known as Gojoseon. Gojoseon is the earliest contemporary Korean state and was formed in about 2333 BCE. And it's basically in this northwestern area here. In fact, in some sources, it could even be in northwestern China as we know it today. Now, Gojoseon derives basically their creation to a god, a particular god known as Hwanin, is basically Hwan and In. His son is Hwan Nung. Asks his father, Hwanin, if he can rule a kingdom. And so Hwanin sends Hwanung to Korea. At Korea, he goes to what we know as Mount Taebaek. At Mount Taebaek, he founds a city known as Sinsi. So at Mount Taebaek, he forms the city of Sinsi with his ministers, his 3,000 attendants, and basically creates this heavenly divine city, right? That is the creation myth of Gojoseon initially, okay? Then, there are two characters in this story, bear and tiger, praying to become humans. They go to Hwanung to ask if they can become humans. Hwanung gives them a diet of mugwort, garlic, all that shit. Basically tells them, go on this diet, you'll become a human. The bear succeeds in doing this. By the way, this was for 100 days. The bear succeeds in doing this. The tiger fails. And so because of that, the bear naturally, as you do, becomes a woman. I know, a woman. She is then impregnated by, you guessed it, Hwanung. That in turn will lead to her being pregnant and creating the son known as Dangun, who creates Gojoseon. And so that is the founding myth of Gojoseon. That comes to us from what we know as the Samsuk-yusa. The Samsuk-yusa was compiled in the 13th century by a Buddhist monk and is some of the last surviving Korean history that we know of, essentially. A lot of Korean history was burned during the Japanese invasion of Korea. From 1910 to 1921, between the Teruchi government general and the Saito government general, the Japanese burned and destroyed more than 200,000 volumes of Korean history, mainly ancient, which had greatly influenced Japan and China. Therefore, most Japanese experts have had to depend on Japanese sources which have been influenced by a colonial legacy. However, there was another source that survived the Japanese burnings. The Hwandan Gogi. This was allegedly compiled in 1911. The Hwandan Gogi disagrees that this is the full creation myth of Gojoseon. The Hwandan Gogi argues that Gojoseon is not the earliest Korean kingdom. No, the Hwandan Gogi argues that Gojoseon is the third oldest Korean kingdom, and that there are two other older, much more ancient Korean kingdoms that have existed prior to Gojoseon. Now, so first things first, what we just read beforehand was the first page of the Samsak Yusa. It details the history of Gojoseon and the evolution from Hwanin, the Hwanung, and then of course to Daegun, or Dangun. I keep saying Daegun, but it's actually Dangun. Sorry for the mispronunciation. I'm not Korean, I don't know if you could tell. But anyway, so right now we're talking about the Hwandan Gogi's interpretation of Korean mythology and the origin of Korea. So first things first, let's go ahead and discuss etymology and discuss the Hwandan Gogi. The Hwandan Gogi is broken up into multiple different books, and it's constructed by 5 authors. So the Hwandan Gogi is basically talking about a humongous span of time between the establishment of Hwan-Guk, Baedal, and of course, Ancient Joseon. Let's talk about the meaning of Hwan. So earlier I said Hwanin. You might have seen the annotation where I wrote down Heavenly King. But Hwanin has a different interpretation when you look at it from the Hwandan Gogi. Now there's an expression that is said on page 83 of The Story of the Great Han, if you could see it right here, which says the expression Hwan Ha Da, which means something is radiant. Hwan means radiance. The word Hwan is a compound ideogram between tree and expand, and I'll draw it out right now. The tree represents the 5 agent theory, which signifies life of God and divinity. A quote from page 85 stipulates, "The radiance that descends from heaven is called Hwan. The radiance that spreads from earth is called Dan." So Hwan, Dan, right? Hwan, heaven, Dan, earth. So that means Hwandan is basically the radiance of heaven and earth, or otherwise known as the records of heaven and earth. Now for today's video, we're going to be looking at basically 2 volumes of the Hwandan Gogi. That would be, of course, the first volume that is edited by Amro An, and the second volume edited by Jongdong Wan. To any Koreans, I'm sorry. So, let's go ahead and get on with the chronology of the Hwandan Gogi. War Thunder is one of the largest vehicle combat games in history and is free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. Command over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations, ranging from biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and main battle tanks of today. With intense combat, detailed vehicles, realistic graphics, and authentic sound effects, War Thunder is the perfect game to control the most powerful war machines in human history. Play with a community of 95 million players worldwide in high-quality PvP battles for fans of military history. War Thunder comes equipped with a sophisticated vehicle damage model, which allows players to target an enemy's engines, field tanks, crew, weapons to disable or kill their opponent. An X-ray view, which can show you exactly where a shell penetrates the armor of a vehicle. Multiple game modes for arcadey, fast-paced players, a grounded simulator mode for history lovers, and a realistic mode as a middle ground. Each vehicle is fully customizable with countless camouflages, historical markings, and more. War Thunder is easy to access, being well optimized for all systems and only requiring a mouse and keyboard on PC for all of its vehicles. For those on the go, a new mobile game version has been introduced, which will allow you to play on iOS and Android. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile devices, with a link in the pinned comment and video description. New and returning players who haven't played in the last 6 months will get a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles, which includes premium vehicles, exclusive vehicle decorator, the Eagle of Valor, 100,000 silver coins, and 7 days of premium account. For a limited time only, so act now. So now we start the chronology of the Hwandan Gogi. If you're interested in following along, on my sources page on my Patreon, I have a link to the blog, but it only has volumes 1 and 2 with the Dangun volume being cut off, so do keep that in mind. Hwanin basically lived in the heaven above what we know as Siberia. Hwanin gained enlightenment in this area of heaven, and his brightness gave birth to creation, allegedly. Alongside that, he lived for a very long time in this enlightened and bright state, and was able to conduct himself similar to a human, but was unseen and could basically do all sorts of things without innate knowledge of them. He just basically did. This energetic man would presumably give birth to children who would descend from heaven. They would descend in what we know as Hyuksu or Amur River in China and Baikal Lake in Russia, and would also show themselves in Mount Baekdu. In these areas, the god Hwanin supervised them up in heaven, and so would teach them how to strike fire and cook food. Many of these children lived with no disease and no war. They never had to have an issue with the cold in this period, like the Ice Age was almost no threat to them whatsoever. This newly created nation would be known as Hwan-Guk, or the Hwan Nation. Now, Hwanin was the ruler of this nation. However, after his presumable passing, 6 Hwanins would take their place afterwards. And we have no information on these Hwanins whatsoever. The people of this nation called themselves Hwan, which means sons of heaven. The sovereigns were called In. So Hwanin means benign sovereigns of the sons of heaven. And that covers essentially this first period of Hwan-Guk, so to speak. This initial starting period where you see the civilization form in the Amur River and then also in Mount Baekdu, this huge expansive landmass. Now, at the end of the Hwan-Guk's reign, Hwanung or Hwanung would take the throne, who is basically the son of Hwanin. And this is basically due to Hwanin wanting to colonize Korea, as it was a blessed enough land to be taught the teachings of heaven. And the ministers of Hwanin agreed that Hwanung or Hwanung would be enough to bless these people. And he would descend around again Mount Baekdu or the Amur River and Baikal Lake. Not only that, but he would also set up a public square in Shandong. With this task at hand, he was equipped with only a mirror, a drum, and a sword. And he managed to complete the 5 tasks of agriculture, life, disease, goodness. The nation was known as Baedal, and its capital was Sinsi. And sacrifices to heaven were a commonplace in Baedal. On the 21st of every month, sacrifices were made to heaven. And he would marry a woman from the Wang tribe, or the Wang name, and make her queen consort. Many things would change over Hwanung. For example, weddings would have presents that were animal skins. People were engaged in farming all throughout the country.
Welcome to the rice fields, motherfucker!
And people loved Hwanung so much that they even sacrificed to him long after his death. The nation itself ruled for thousands of years. We're talking 1,565 years with a total of 18 rulers. Of these rulers, towards the end of Baedal, one of them, named Chuwu Qianwang, otherwise known as Zhaoji Hwanung. This was the 14th Baedal emperor, and Qianwang means emperor. In fact, once Hwanung descended down and formed Baedal, he was known as Hwanung Qianwang. In Chinese, this man is actually called Shi Yu. The Chinese sources depict his appearance as being half goat, half man. I tried to draw hooves on him. He's half bull, he's half man. His face and his head are made out of iron, okay? He could manipulate steel and copper. So he basically has mastery over iron, steel, and copper, with his teeth supposedly made out of copper itself, and his helmet being made out of iron. So not only would this guy have horns, he also had a helmet made out of iron as well. And Chiwu would start to colonize Shandong towards the end of Baedal's reign. Now, Dangun is the first sovereign of ancient Joseon. Dan means birch tree, and Gun means king. That is because Dangun descended to a place of birch trees, giving him that name of Dan. Now, Dangun, similar to Hwanin, similar to Hwanung, would descend from a mountain known as Mountain Hwandan in Heilongjiang province of China. After his death, Dangun was used to represent the rulers that would rule over ancient Joseon. From Mount Wanda, Dangun had the virtue of God and would create a royal decree to make people follow his will of heaven. The people of Guwan, which were basically the 9 tribes of Hwan, otherwise known as the 9 tribes of Korea, basically accepted this royal decree and obeyed him without contest. Because of that, Dangun was enthroned and named the nation Joseon, with the capital of Asadal, which would be the capital of the older nation that we talked about earlier, Gojoseon, the first Korean kingdom in the Samsuk Yusa. Now, in this beginning period, Dangun established peace throughout the country, using entrusted officials to cater to different tasks at hand, like reclaiming land, for example, like managing a military, for example, encouraging agriculture growth, for example. He would marry a woman from Hwanin, the future empress. He asked her to create silkworm. And so, because of all of these efforts, all lived in peace in ancient Joseon. Now, let's get on with the dates. From 2333 BCE, ancient Joseon lasted for 2096 years with 47 rulers. And let's go ahead and get the dates for Hwan-Guk as well as for Baedal as well. But we know that basically Hwan-Guk, we could say that its center was between the Amur River, Mount Baekdu, and Mount Wanda in this area. But from this base, it expanded. So from north to south, it's 12,000 miles. From east to west, it's 4,880 miles. So this territory, Hwan-Guk, is absolutely humongous. This massive nation was split between, of course, 12 different confederacies, each with its own name for the given territory. Through these 7 rulers of Hwanin, the Hwan-Guk civilization lasted 3,301 years, or 63,182 years. Using this time span, we can deduce that Hwan-Guk lasted from 7,182 to about 3,898 BCE. So this is only accounting for the time span given to us for it lasting 3,001 years. But if we go with the 63,182 years, things get complicated, and we'll discuss that towards the end of the video, I believe. While Hwanung was sent to the east to colonize this area, another person was sent to the west. That would be Bongo. Now, around the time that Hwanung was leaving, Bongo loved magic and had asked Hwanin if he could go with Hwanung to Mount Baekdu, and Hwanin agreed with this plan, and so permitted Bongo to leave this territory and go all the way to Mount Baekdu. After he became monarch, he would be called Badu Gahan and would be the primary ancestor of Chinese people. Now, of the initial issue Hwanung had to deal with, the first issue was between 2 tribes, Boim and Wong. Boim and Wong had basically prayed to Hwanung to make them into heavenly, radiant, and enlightened humans. And so because of that, Hwanung would basically offer to give them a test so that they could prove that they could do it and transform them into these beings. The Wong clan, the Wong tribe, was successful, but the Boim clan was not, as they were seen as lazy. One of the Wong tribe's women basically wanted to be pregnant as well, and so had asked Hwanung if she could become pregnant. Hwanung would turn himself into one of the Hwan, that being the sons of heaven, and would marry this woman and make her pregnant. Thus, this woman of the Wong tribe would be one of the first people to give birth to the descendants of the people of heaven, coming through the lineage of Hwanung and the Wong tribe. If this story is familiar to you, it should be, because the Wong tribe is supposed to be the bear, and the Boeum tribe is supposed to be the tiger from the Samsuk Yusa. So you see how this older story from the Samsuk Yusa plays into the creation of Hwanung. Now Galgo Hwanung would make borders with what we know as the legendary Chinese emperor and hero who taught China agriculture, Shen Nong. Now another Hwanung by the name of Zhao Ji would basically become very feared, as he would kickstart the mining of iron, steel, and copper in his country and change his name to Qi Wu Qian Wang, otherwise known as Qi Yu, otherwise Qi Wu, the emperor of Baedal. And he would start a warpath with his expertise in mining and his expertise in weapons, and would be feared among the battlefield. Now Qi Wu's name would translate directly to thunders and rains, change mountains and rivers. Qi Wu found Shen Nong's territory to be very weak, and so because of that, attacked him due to that fact. Now, Shen Nong's tribe previously, according to Chinese sources, had merged with the Yellow Emperor's forces at the Battle of Dangun, leading to Qi Yu attacking the Hwan Empire. He would send forth an army from Shandong and then to Hoi Dai, attacking Shen Nong's nation. It's here where the Yan Emperor's forces retreating into his lands as the Yellow Emperor, ancestor to all Han Chinese, raised an army against Qi Wu, where the Battle of Zhulo takes place. Now, let's go with the Chinese sources for the Battle of Zhulo. According to the Chinese sources, the Emperor Qi Yu basically led 72 of 81 tribes against both the emperors, Yan and Yellow Emperors, in this battle. They killed Qi Yu in Hebei and creating the Jia civilization, otherwise known as the Chinese civilization. However, apparently from Hwandan Gogi, it was Qi Yu who was successful at the Battle of Zhaolu and would make the Yellow Emperor his vassal, then would send 5 generals west of Baedal to defeat Diku Gaojin, which was basically Shen Nong's grandson. So now the world was divided between 3 nations. But Dai Yo over here had learned the sexagarian cycle. Tang Ji learned characters under the rule of Qi Wu, so they had actually gained knowledge during this time. And so because of this, most lords in this time period had basically sweared loyalty to Qi Yu. Qi Wu himself, like I drew, is ox looking, but he has 4 eyes, which I could put right here. And then he also has 6 arms, so I don't know what kind of hand job this guy is giving. And he is a master of weapons, so I'm assuming each of these arms has a weapon. And that basically covers the reign of Baedal, because basically after the 18th Hwanung, basically Dangun would come from Mount Wanda. And we see that Baedal lasts from about 3,898 BCE to 2,333 BCE. So that's basically the end of the Hwandan Gogi and the chronology. We pretty much end off at this point. I can go into detail on Joseon, but maybe that's something for another time when you guys want to learn about the history of Korea. This was tiring. I'm not even gonna fucking lie to you guys. It's a lot. We're still going to talk about the proof of how China is connected to Korea when we talk about the Hwan-Guk's influence on different nations. Because the Hwan-Guk didn't just stop at East Asia. Hwan-Guk actually would go eastward and westward and influence Western civilization as well as Native Americans. And we will get into that when we get into our next source, which would be the story of the Great Han, which is not a primary source, but is a lecture on the Hwandan Gogi that really gets into the nitty-gritty of why the Hwandan Gogi is the way it is, goes over like different reasons for why this argument's strong, this argument isn't, gives you proof on different aspects of the Hwandan Gogi and what is being left out in mainstream media. So we're going to get into that right now. I gotta take a shit. Now, this book is based both on English and Korean, and is about a lecture on the Hwandan Gogi that was based in the US by An Gyong-jeon. Now, this book argues extensively for the legitimacy of the Hwandan Gogi and makes a huge amount of claims, actually, that, I'll go into. First and foremost, the Hongshan culture. This is a real-life culture that exists in Northeast Asia that many scholars attach the culture of Hwan-Guk and Baedal to. You can see this on page 139, essentially. And all throughout this book over here connects the Hongshan civilization to Baedal overall. So you see how we have the Chinese progenitors here that are related to the Hongshan culture. And in fact, the book argues that the the progenitors of Chinese culture, that being Bohui, that being the Yellow Emperor, all these guys, the Yan Emperor and stuff, these are Dongyi, which are essentially a different type of barbarian tribe that existed east of China, known as the Dongyi, essentially, or the Great Barbarians of the East. They even connect Japanese culture to Hongshan culture as well. The reason for this is because the burial sites of Hongshan culture sites in Japan and Korea are similar to each other in the usage of earth and heaven in their creations. You can see this in how various sites emphasize the square of earth and the circle of heaven. It suggested that the heavenly people of Hwan-Guk influenced not only the Chinese and also future Koreans, but also Native Americans. That being that they passed through the Bering Strait and then influenced the Native American peoples living there because of the use of similar cultural and linguistic characteristics, much like using the word corn, which has the same word for Korean and Native American languages. In fact, continues to connect Native American cultures to Korea with the use of jade and heavenly birds being associated in both cultures. The book also claims that the Sumerians came from Tian Shan Mountains, so they've made a migration there. And because of that, Sumerians, specifically the ones under Sumil, one of the confederacies of the Hwan-Guk, are descended from the Hwan-Guk, especially Sargon of Akkad having similar clothing to that of Korean men. This continues with connections to Abraham. We even have connections to Greece with heavenly birds as well. Another Chinese people that were created were the Mongols, and thus the Xiongnu, one of these peoples that lived in the Hwan-Guk, created their own people, so to speak, their own nomadic horse archer civilization. And they would preserve aspects of Hwan-Guk culture, similar to how Japanese people would support and continue aspects of Hwan-Guk culture. So overall, this book goes over many different details over how many different cultures across the planet are related to one another. But it does have a lot of critics, as does the Hwandan Gogi in general. They rip apart many aspects of the Hwandan Gogi, including the claims about its size, about the size of the Hwan-Guk Empire, or its time span. Some publications think that it's impossible for a Stone Age empire to maintain an empire that spans from North to South Pole, which, I mean, fair enough, it would take a lot of walking. Many publications also attack the word Hwan-Guk, how the origin of Hwan-Guk is just a mispronunciation and misspelling and mistyping of the word Hwanin, misinterpreting Hwanin with Hwan-Guk. So instead of the time of Hwanin, it's the time of Hwan-Guk nation. This singular character, being a variant character created in the 1500s, would cause many different authors to misinterpret the word Hwanin with Hwan-Guk, leading to the creation of the Hwan-Guk nation. In other words, the authors were fucking stupid, and many of them have been criticized for being non-existent. Essentially, the 5 books of the Hwandan Gogi, written by many different authors, some of them were complete fakes, who never had any credentials whatsoever, who even strangely used terms of the Qing Empire in their book that was about empires that were tens of thousands of years earlier than the Qing dynasty. It's extremely funny when you consider that the books were supposedly made during the time of ancient Joseon. And you know, many of these critics also have issues with the amount of connections that the Hwandan Gogi makes to different cultures. Like, why is it that we're connecting Sumerians and Koreans together because of their love for wrestling and cows? Its many mistakes were very influential. Many pseudo-historians support the Hwandan Gogi and will glaze the shit out of it. Even the South Korean President Park Geun-hye, was criticized for using the Hwandan Gogi's quotes. Now, the strongest support for the Hwandan Gogi comes from a blog that I'll link right here. This blog argues that the Hwandan Gogi predicted a stellar event that happened about 1773 BCE, in which 5 stars were perfectly aligned in a straight line. Here's the quote. In the 50th Mujin, 5 stars were arranged in a straight line, and a yellow crane filed into a pine in the yard. In this sentence, the 50th Mujin means 1773 BCE. A researcher of Korea Institute for Advanced Study, that being Park Chang-bum, experimented on this record. He commented on the outcome and quote, although the real arranging showed in the evening of July 13, 1734 BCE, considering it was about 3,700 years past, the record is coincident with the real phenomenon. That's a little bit of glazing there. Now, in addition to both this blog and another one right here, it argues that the presence of dolmens, which are large megalithic structures that were used as tombs and graves in ancient history, were a connection to Baedal and Hwan-Guk and Gojoseon, especially when you consider most of them are common in Korea. In fact, 40% of the world's dolmens are in Korea. That proves the Baedal Gojoseon connection because the existence of these dolmens can be traced to the chronology of the Hwandan Gogi. This is also connected with the existence of bronze daggers that exist throughout northeast China and Korea. They link to an ancestral past as well and align perfectly with the timeline of the Hwandan Gogi. If you want more people that are supportive of the Hwandan Gogi, you can check out the Glazers at the STB YouTube channel, which have many lectures on the Hwandan Gogi, including a 3-hour fucking video and a fucking book concert. I'm not joking. The STB YouTube channel and the Great Han book both argue that China is directly responsible for covering up Korean history. The Bango from the Hwandan Gogi, if you remember 30 minutes earlier from the video, basically is the Chinese figure Pangu, who is the primordial being of Chinese mythology. But the Hwandan Gogi, he is a Hwan-Guk human. And supporters of the Hwandan Gogi argue that the Chinese government has changed these Proto-Koreans into mythological figures, the 3 sovereigns and the 5 emperors of Chinese mythology, and separating them from their Korean origin, including also turning them into inhuman creatures except for Huangdi, who is, of course, the creator of Chinese civilization, allegedly. This allegedly started at around the 1980s when an archaeological site at the Neuhuling, however it's pronounced, basically convinced the Chinese government to turn these sage emperors of Baedal into Chinese founding emperors, right? To erase that history. To contrast the Glazers, let's talk about those most critical to the Hwandan Gogi. We have a site known as en.namu. This site completely rips apart the Hwandan Gogi in every single facet, attacking it from all angles. One example being how there's 12 confederacies in the Hwan-Guk nation, which coincides with the 12 tribes of Israel. A little bit weird, but there's also an Adam and Eve story in the Hwandan Gogi. It's, there in 1 or 2 lines, and then it isn't brought up in the other volumes. Maybe it is later down the line, but those are in Korean, so I wouldn't know. And it rips apart the authors of the Hwandan Gogi most importantly. See, the book was supposedly compiled from 4 books, essentially, in 1911 by Unko Gui-hyun Soo, who was then supervised by Yi Gi. First volume's author was Anham Ro, who was a Buddhist monk of the Silla dynasty. But actually, through this site criticizing it, he was actually a Confucian monk, actually. The second volume's author was Won Dong-jung, who was a Neo-Confucian scholar from the late Goryeo dynasty. However, this site argues that he couldn't have been the one writing this down, as the second volume starts off as a Sino-centric history of Baedal and then switches to primarily a Korean focus, focusing entirely on Gojoseon. The next author would be Yi-am, or Liam, however it's spelt. He was a civil servant of the late Goryeo dynasty and the creator of the Dangun Sega. This is the book where it only talks about the Dangans and Gojoseon. Now, This was disproven to be the creator because his beliefs mostly are of the Confucian Buddhist variety, but he was of spiritual freedom because he had multiple different beliefs in Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And it runs contrary with the divine state myth of Gojoseon. The next author is Byom-jang, who wrote the Bug Boy Yug of Northern Buyeo. He was a scholar of the Goryeo dynasty, and he served as a courtier in the Yuan dynasty, and he only came to Goryeo accompanying the princess Juk Dai-jang, who ended up becoming the queen of King Chun Gi-yul of Goryeo, and he settled in Goryeo. In other words, the dude was Chinese. Last author, of course, is Yi Meg, who wrote the Taebaek Ilsa, thank you teleprompter. And you know why he didn't write it down? He was exiled. In other words, a lot of these authors are frauds, and this site goes heavy into criticizing the Hwandan Gogi. I can go over it for hours and hours and hours on end, including, of course, criticizing the family of Yi Gi. You see, allegedly, his family would argue that they were the ones that held the Hwandan Gogi in secret all these years. They held it together. They hid it from the public. All of these people are somewhat connected to the authors in distant past. And STB YouTube channel does a great job of glazing the shit out of this concept right here. So ultimately, it's due to one family that the Hwandan Gogi survived. And that's why it was later released in the 70s anyway. So you can thank these guys, supposedly. Now, recently, I earned a trip to Pyongyang, so I know extensively through the secret libraries of Pyongyang that ultimately the Hwandan Gogi is not only correct, but it is actually missing pages that are hidden beneath the libraries of Kim Il-sung's secret tombs. But the most suspicious thing about the Hwandan Gogi is the claim of Hwan-Guk's founding, that being in 7,191 BCE or 63,182 years ago, which is very funny, because we know that the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate of West Mongolia, otherwise known as Finngolia, was created in 59,745 BCE, as shown with this source right here. So we know that both empires were very related to each other time-wise. It's very interesting. And especially when you consider and use the same strategies that some of the authors of the Hwandan Gogi use when connecting Korean mythology and history to other cultures. When you connect Korean cultural aspects with other cultures, you get some very fascinating connections, such as with the bear. You remember back to the Samsuk use of the Hwandan Gogi. In the Hwan-Guk, Hwanung would leave, would find a bear and a tiger. The tiger and bear would pray to either become radiant humans or just become humans. And the bear would succeed, the tiger would fail. The Proto-Finnics revered the bear, the Otso, and deemed it a very spiritual and holy animal. This bear tribe, this bear animal, how much do we know that these were native Koreans and not some other Asiatic peoples? What if the bear tribe were Finns? After all, the bear tribe, the Boehm tribe, migrated into Korea recently. Were seen as stupid. If not stupid, outsiders. Maybe they were ignorant because they were newly established tribe. But as everybody knows in my hit book, The Finno-Korean Hyperwar, which you can get for 6 payments of $69.69, it goes into many different aspects of the Hwan Empire and some of its history with that of the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate, and that the Hwan Empire established itself in 13,000 BCE. Me, as well as fellow professors here at the Rofl University Academy of Rofl Excellence, have concluded that the Hwandan Gogi's original date of 63,000 was referring, in fact, to the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate's foundation. It is talking about the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate. So there wasn't 3 ancient empires of ancient Korea, there was 4, as Koreans are related to Finnish people. As we can see, the Hwan-Guk of 7,191 BCE is a diminished state of the original Hwan Empire, which fought and barely survived in what we know as the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. This is a fragmented state of Hwan-Guk. If the Koreans and Finns were so deeply connected, why don't we see more connections? Why do we only have so little to go off of? Well, the reason for that is because of the destruction of the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. As you can see right here, Finno-Korean Hyperwar at page 420, you can see the decline of technology with the Finno-Korean Hyperwar. So we go from the apex of technology back to Stone Age. But two pieces of evidence remain that connect these groups of people. The Ural-Altaic languages, which connect Korea to Finland, have weird connections to each other. These two peoples have somewhat of a link linguistically, and they have a link in another way. Both of these nations have an ancient homeland that should have its own special dedicated video to. In our next video, we will talk about how both of these cultures are connected, and also of their shared homeland, Turan. Thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to play it for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile by using the links in the pinned comment or video description. New and returning players who haven't played for 6 months will get the exclusive bonus pack across PC and consoles, including the premium vehicles and other bonuses for a limited time only, so don't miss out. Hello everybody, welcome to the end of the video. I'm Master Rofl, and I hope you enjoyed the video. We'll be going over some of the comments that were left behind in the first video. Now, I didn't really get any huge questions on the lore or anybody who was really like invested in Finngolia or the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate. A lot of people were just kind of like surprised that I finally showed off my face and were talking about my appearances. A lot of you guys made comments about that, which I appreciate. Something else is that we had a few people arguing over the lore as well in the comments about Yakub. Now, something that I need to clarify is that Yakub only pertains to Africa at the moment. And I really wanted to make the video to really hone in on Finland and the Finngolia side of history, so to speak. We will be talking about Yakub at some point, but keep in mind that it will happen when we get onto Africa, you know, during the early hominids in the Proto-African kingdoms, okay? So do wait for Yakub there. We also had a commenter who... sorry, I'm tired. There's just so much recording. We also had a commenter who was a little bit confused over the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate and its war with Atlantis. Keep in mind, Hyperborea and Atlantis was never destroyed by the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate. We know that Atlantis was destroyed by a civil war. We also know that Hyperborea was swallowed up by glaciers. So all we know at the moment is that ultimately, that is not, the Proto-Finnic Khaganate were not the destroyers of Atlantis. Hell, someone could argue that Atlantis was swallowed up by the Greek gods, actually. But there were two periods of Atlantean history. That would be before the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate and after the Proto-Finnic Holy Roman Khaganate. So that is something to keep in mind about. So those are the two specific lore questions I wanted to really get into. Now, if you have any more lore questions on the Hwan Empire, Finngolia, any more type of like civilizations that I should cover in the future, you can ask me in the YouTube comments down below. You can ask me on my Patreon. And that's really about it. The next video, I hope, will come out a lot faster. This video took a lot longer for a variety of research reasons, you know. So if you guys want to see the videos up earlier before it's available for everybody, you can check it out on my Patreon, where all videos are up early for early access. And I think that's about it. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for supporting. And I will see you guys next time. I'm getting the fuck out of here. Damn, you guys still here? Why don't you watch a video on screen? Maybe watch the Finngolia video, huh? Get the fuck out of here. Go watch the Finngolia video. Get the fuck out of here.